Good morning. I wanted to bring you guys outside for a moment on my run to get a New York bacon, egg, and cheese and a little coffee before I talk to you about Tropic Death. I'm going to keep it pretty short this morning, but I'm also going to share with you a really big idea that I think will be useful for you in Tropic Death, which is that idea of elements and themes. It's something we've already been working with a little bit when I asked you to choose one particular element last week to talk about in the first story of Tropic Death Drought. I asked you to choose either dialect, that is specific language specific to a place. I asked you to choose either dialect, food, and one other element that I asked you to look for to decide about atmosphere. Almost all of you used dialect in the project. So I actually want to talk about why elements are important. And to do so, I brought you out here to the to good old Fort Tryon Park so I can show you something about forests and trees that obviously you're going to know, but I'm going to tell you something new about what you already know. Take a look. Here in Fort Tryon, there's some good graffiti, gotta have it. Here in Fort Tryon, there are a lot of different trees, and together they constitute, like, say it with me, right? A forest. You might also say that they constitute a park. You might also say that they just constitute a collection of trees. Sorry to give you some whiplash there. But I think almost all of us can agree that a lot of trees put together in a group is not just a collection of trees. There's that old phrase, someone that couldn't see the forest for the trees. The idea that you're looking at all the small specific things and not recognizing the larger thing that's taking place or going on. I also think we could all agree this is a park. It's a collection of trees that are organized for a particular sort of like social or institutional purpose, for people to experience. And what I want to point out to you here is that each individual tree is an element. But to think of them as a park, or to think of them as a forest, is to treat them as something closer to a theme. To treat them, get it? All right, to treat them as something closer to a theme. It's a collection of smaller things that together form a larger construct or a collection that you could then think of as being meaningful for someone else or something else. And if we think of the trees just as a forest, then they're meaningful in an ecological sense or an environmental sense. They matter because they're this natural collection. If we think of them as a park, they matter for us in a personal sense or a social sense. They matter to people for a particular reason. And that helps us think about, the stories we can tell about them in different ways. It allows us to tell different sorts of stories. So these are these two super key words that I think will be really useful for us in Tropic Death: elements and themes. Our assignment for this week will be for you to find your own elements in this text and develop out of them a particular theme. One of the things I think is so exciting about Tropic Death is that it's not old classic literature like Dante's Inferno or like the Iliad. It's something in which it's respected, it's beloved, it's part of a new canon, but there are a lot of themes and ideas in it that, rather than being told by someone like me or being told by a scholar who's 1,000 years old and dead, you can develop for yourself. And this week you're going to be deciding what some of the themes of this text are by looking for its particular elements. You are in charge of thinking about what's important in this text, how things fit together, and what kind of themes they make up. Rather than having me tell you, for instance, that Dante's Inferno is about sin and Dante's relationships to his contemporaries in Florence, you can decide what Tropic Death is about. But before we do that, I'm going to give you just a brief example of a particular moment here on page 31. You can see it's a moment where I felt it was important to take a lot of notes and do some annotations. I'm going to read really briefly, highlight a couple elements, and then talk to you about the sort of theme it might create. Once a day the Rums ate. At dusk, curve of crimson gold in the sensuous tropic sky, they had tea. English to a degree, it was a rite absurdly regal. pauperized native blacks clung to the utmost vestiges of the crown. 2, it was more than a notion for a black cane-hole digger to face the turmoil of a hoe or fork or bill, Zugaboo word for cutlass, on a bare cup of molasses coffee. This is a pretty small moment, and in terms of the plot, you might say they're just having coffee. But they're not just having coffee. The coffee, the Walrond points out, is English to a degree. They're having it, or a tea rather, English to a degree, and they're having it in a way that is absurdly regal, a rite, and in this way a sort of custom. So there are many of these details about the practice of having tea this way, and the problems of a bare cup of molasses coffee. These tiny elements about food and the way that they deal with food, or the way that they deal with their tea or their coffee. Thematically, what issues does that bring up? What do those elements come together to produce? Take a moment and think about it for yourself. Maybe admire the trees for a second. And I hope it's not a surprise to you, at least to me, that brings up thematics or themes of custom and colonialism, or imperialism. What happens when the customs of one people, the English, become the customs of another sort of people, or another group of people, another culture? This is an example of extracting from elements to larger themes, and it's something I'm going to be asking you to do a lot in the coming week, and something I'm really looking forward to, because as I've said a bunch of times, this is a text for all of us, a text from the 20th century, and something that I think will apply both to your lives and our collective history. So, I hope you've enjoyed this brief walk in Fort Tryon Park. It's a beautiful day. I hope you get outside if you can. Make sure always to keep safe, keep your mask with you. Be healthy, keep reading. Take care, guys.